were you able to go through all of the?
No, let's do that now.
Before the recording, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Oh, well, so this is the presentation for today. We're going to be talking about Power App Basics. And the next slide. The next meeting is going to be June 11th. It's again 12 to 1:30, and it's using encrypted connections. And Sharon Reed's going to talk about that. You can start registering for the Past 24 Summit. This is the premier SQL Server conference, and it's back again in Seattle. Here's some upcoming Data Saturdays and SQL Saturdays. And then in the St. Louis area, we are going to have the DevOps conference in St. Charles. That's going to be August 14th through the 16th. And then the last slide is just about the presentation today. So thank you, Murali. This is being recorded, and it will go back up on our YouTube channel.
All right, thank you. So I do have this list of items we're going to talk about today. More than just having presentation, I'm going to just go into mostly demo mode, showing things in the application and stuff like that. So first, starting with the basics, go to make.powerapps.com to get to the home page of Power Apps. Not sure why they have it as make. Power BI is app.power BI, and Power Automate is make.power automate. So they did switch up a little bit between, so you can see a list of items here. The key things we're gonna worry about right now is the apps. So you can build apps. Now there are varying sizes of teams that normally work with this. A lot of times the things that I'm going to talk today will help like a small company, small team that has to do a lot of work with Power Apps, and they don't have support or help from multiple people doing I don't know, like workspace admin stuff, or where they have access to do some of those workspace admin and things like that. So just some things to consider, especially if you're a small organization. You can see it's very helpful, especially I feel like with all the templates that they have. So you can start with data, page design, or app template. One of the key things, if you're not familiar with Power Apps too much, there are two main kinds of app design methods. One is the model-driven one, and another is Canvas. You can also create another external-facing web site. But most of the things that I'm going to talk about today is Canvas apps. Just a quick understanding of what those means. Model-driven mostly mean already pre-built model. It connects mainly with Dataverse that they have in the backend that already lives in the Power Apps service. If you're familiar with the term Power BI service, it's kind of similar. That I want to say that. But the Canvas ones are ones that you can build from scratch, even though the backend can have a model behind it. As we go through, we see what that means. So one of the first items that I want to talk about is the app deployment. So going from the thing that you see, I want to go back step by step. So in this case, app deployment for, again, smaller organizations. for us, when we started with this, we didn't have like multiple workspaces like you have for Power BI. We do have multiple workspaces for Power BI where we do like deployment pipelines, move it from dev to QA to prod in Power BI. Here, we didn't know as a team if we were going to invest in Power App too much or if we were going to diversify, do like a different kind of application. For like apps or using Azure App Service or something like that to deploy like a React app or Flask or whatever it is. So during this time, we just decided we'll use the environment that was made available to us. It's like a single workspace that the entire organization currently uses. But I mean, again, the idea is if you're a smaller organization, you're not worried about workspace at an initial investment time. So once you do, then you'll have the same kind of deployments. But at the moment, what you can do is what we do. And this is very simple. It's a very simple concept. As you can see, the kind of apps that we have with the naming, I'm not going to go into the apps at the moment, but you can see what we did with the naming itself. Again, these are the kind of things that comes with, when you have limited resources, how do you work with apps? So you can see an app that's called dev and the one without dev, that is a prod deployment. So we create an app. When we are creating and working on it, we just call it with the name dev. It's like the basic 100 years, 200 years ago, if you had ever touched anything like this, you would have come up with this idea. It's not a very new concept or anything like that, but it's just something that works if you don't want to, again, invest time. And if you don't know that you're going to go through this, have a threshold, like say 5 or 6 apps or 3 apps later, if you want to invest that workspace, and then it will be meaningful and a lot easier for you. But till then, what we just did was this dev, and then the exceptions. We're just calling it. You can see highlighting here, dev, same name with underscore with dev on it. Same name without dev on it is our prod app. I will also go in the back part of it as I am showing you the future, not the future, like a couple of items down the lane that I have to talk about, which is the data sources and stuff there. I will show you how these are different, how you can like easily store them as such. Also, let me open one of the demo apps that we have. And again, it's not like a very difficult situation, difficult or a new concept. It's just saving. So initial creation, initial app deployment is the one that takes the longest time. We have something. Thank you. Got it. Override. Yeah, those kind of things are sometimes helpful, especially if multiple people are working. Only one person can work without overriding each other unnecessarily. Also, for the deployment and code related Git integration, stuff like that, they do have an experimental feature right now. So Power Apps can integrate with Git. Multiple people can work on it at the same time. There are some limitations whenever somebody accidentally whenever multiple people check out the same app, they could accidentally override and stuff like that. You can check out the Git integration. It's again an experimental one. It's not general availability. It's not even preview. So keep in mind, experimentals are a little bit tricky to go into production apps. So just keep in mind that. So for the deployment itself, again, I'm going to show you a simple thing. If you're not familiar with the app itself, there are a lot of buttons, like drop downs and stuff that you can use here. Maybe during the course of this presentation, you'll get used to some of that. If you're already not, that's just for all levels, but mainly beginners. So when you go into the app, it automatically, I don't know if you noticed, it went into the mode where it edited the application. That's why it was giving me that. So let me exit. So if I hover over, I can either play with the application or I can go into the edit mode. So I have you can automatically go into the edit mode where you can edit the components in the back end of the application. Again, going back to dev versus prod, it's again very simple. Save as. When you save as, it'll give you an option to save it as whatever it is. So if I have it as -dev already, I'll just remove that, and then it'll let me save as. And for some, if in case I do not have it, in this case, it's the same name as demo app 1, so it's not going to let me do that. I could just click save. But in case I do have already existing app that I'm trying to overwrite, it will give me a message saying there's an already existing app. Do you want to overwrite it? You know, just like any other Windows stuff. So you can overwrite your apps. So that is for the dev to prod. Let me show you the code storage. So another part of this is I can download a copy. So if I do that, what's gonna do is just basically a download. Pictures. So I wanted to do this online when I am with you guys. So you see that there's something happening live when I do this. So there's no other MS app file. So that's a type of this file, so to speak. I'm going to save it as such in a place. Why? I'm going to show you in a second. When I open that, oops. When I open that, you can see it has an MS app. I mean, again, for a beginner, I had no idea what that meant. I was like, what am I supposed to open that with? It's basically just a zip file. Underneath is JSON. There's a bunch of JSONs that holds information about the components, about the screens, and so on and so forth. I'll go through like real quick some of the items in this. So if I do extract it, you can see, just ignore the MS app for right now. You see a list of items like the checksum, header, properties, and stuff like that. So it is a list of items that stores information. All of these are JSON files. So, and I have this open in my VS Code. Give me one sec. These.
So it's just a manifest of what's part of the app.
Yes. Yeah.
All your code will be in there as well.
Yeah. Here.
That's cool.
So
Sometimes you have to.
all right. So let me move it over here. Yeah, you can see it's a list of items, JSON properties that it stores, a lot of stuff. Don't want to get to the place. I mean, it's really long. You can see some of them depends on what you're trying to do. It may be useful or not. Actually, don't say. But there are a couple of things that are very helpful that I'm gonna show you in a second. So in controls, you can see there are 4 things: 1, 4, 53, 121. Initially, it didn't make sense to me. Again, these are things we don't really care about if you're using that Git integration and stuff like that. But if you want to do some kind of changes in the back end, or if you want to understand it a little bit, these are very helpful. I'm not going to go deep into it or anything. You can go inside and check it out too in your MS app when you create. The helpful thing is if you open it, you would know these correspond to the main screen or there's something called app start. So it corresponds, the one corresponds to that, 453 and 121 corresponds to the screens that I've created. So I have in the app itself 3 different screens, which when I go back to the app in a little bit, you'll see it. There's also an internal index that gives these values. So it's not as easy as you writing a number, throwing a JSON in there, and it will work. There's an index in there. I'll quickly just show one example, but it's not very. This is something you don't have to worry too much about. So the publish order index is what that is, I think, very helpful. If you create an app yourself, you go through the list, you can see what that means for the app. And actually, you can see that within that screen, every property, every item, every container, every control that you create will have it listed inside that JSON file. So basically, everything is a JSON file. The code is there. Again, they have helped us do this using the Git integration automatically. So when you look at when you do a Git integration, when you see some of the backend stuff, then you know what it's kind of doing. Again, I want to keep it lighter because this is geared more towards the beginners, but at the same time, I do want you to know that these are the backend stuff that you can go into in case you're lost about it.
Question on that topic. Just a second. But when you renamed when you did a save as and renamed, did you ever notice that have any problem with like people's links to your Power App? Like like does that stay the same?
So the question is about saving as and the link staying the same. Link as in link within the.
Like when you distribute a link to the Power App itself. So,
oh yes, so the save as is usually between dev and prod. So when you initially create a prod version from the dev, there's going to be a new link. People will test with the dev version as much as possible, and then once we are ready for prod deployment, they will have to, give them the prod URL, and then once that happens the first time, every time you save as after that, the link will stay the same.
So if you overwrite a dev to a prod again, like you upgrade a dev to prod, you might end up with a new.
No,
it goes by the name, so to speak.
It is. In the back end, actually, it's a GUID. Everything is a GUID for Microsoft, most of the Power Platform stuff. So when you do a save as and you overwrite a prod copy, the links, everything stays the URL stays the same.
Oh.
So when we go.
So prod stays prod, or you mean the dev now gets promoted into, prod, so to speak?
Yeah, whenever we call this, we made more changes to add features, and then we saved as this. Yep. I don't want to click into it, but let me show you this
one. The links for prod people
stay the same. Yes.
Thank you so much.
The top one, you can see, you can go through this stuff on there.
I've been afraid to test the idea.
It is. It works. It works. It stays the same. Unless you delete the app. Then it changes. Yeah. It's a good question. Yeah. So the first time you do it, it's going to generate a new link, but then after that you save as, it's going to be fine. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Since you mentioned that too, I'm gonna show to the next part. So this is the zipping, unzipping, the same thing. You can, just like how I saved as, I can also import an MS app. So you can do the same thing with the list underneath, with all those JSON underneath. If you want to create a new app, you can just do the opposite and upload it. So in case you don't have this Git integration, you can bring that MS app down, store it somewhere where you can have it. In case you are afraid of deleting it accidentally or giving somebody works 24 hours straight, forgets and deletes it, you can always upload it back from the MS app, which is very helpful.
It's good for replace all type situations where you need to replace everything.
You replace everything too, yes. So you can always, so if you know what you're looking for, especially like the names. So you can see in this case, like I have it, I did not change any of these things. Whenever I created it, it just called it main screen 1 or screen container. So the vertical and horizontal containers were having, all these automatic names. But if I wanted to change it, if I didn't want to use the GUI, I can do it in the JSON directly too. Personally, I do like using the GUI. It's a little bit faster for me because I know which one I'm changing when I click on it and stuff. But yeah, it's definitely an option. Okay, so the data sources. As you can see, we have some information inside the app. One of the main reasons we have an application is so we can collect data. So of course, that means there's a backend data source. We are trying to put it somewhere. And in conventional application design, which I'm not very familiar with, I'm not an app developer or anything. I'm a data engineer. I do like SQL development. I do data movement and stuff like that. So my very little knowledge, I believe what it is basically you have a front end that can collect data. There's an intermediate layer that checks for the business calculations and logic. The backend that makes sure your server gets that data in. So usually like applications store a single stream of data, like the entire list of items that you want to store in one go, single transaction, and then whatever you need to do in the backend for your database to do all the logic and stuff too. In case you want to store it in transact. I mean, the main thing should go in a transactional table and master list and stuff like that. So we'll see both kinds. But for this case, in your app screen itself, you can see these parts very helpful. So I'm going to call them the tree view as layers. I see them kind of like layers. They have screens and components. So you can create components by combining a few things and creating like a template component. So if I wanted like gallery, this plus sign, this new button, and so on and so forth, that also has some level of quick transportation to other applications that you might create. Creating those components or using them directly from here is very helpful. However, look at the screens. You can create multiple screens, and then within the screen you will see you'll be able to do multiple components within that. Like it could be, again, we're able to see containers that classify and say, I want it here. I want it to be a little bit more structured and organized. So this screen is very helpful. And then the sources, the data sources. Here I'm using SQL Server. There are multiple sources. You can go through a list of sources that are available for you. But for me, it's the easiest one is the SQL Server. Before I go into a little bit more about the sources itself, remember I mentioned about dev to prod. You can parameterize it in a different scenario, but again, for a smaller, simpler deployment of this, what we had done, again, if you're a small org and you're not investing too much time, you can think about this. One of the problems about not parameterizing is you cannot really change anything about the source. So if I look at the source, these are the 3 tables that I have used in my application. If I look at the settings for that for those tables, I do not have anything that lets me parameterize it. The problems with those are, if you are trying to change from dev to prod, you cannot do it by just changing it from my dev server name to prod server name. Also, the other thing is, if you add, thinking, okay, let me add the prod tables when I have this these dev tables, and then I'll remove the dev tables so nothing breaks. Unfortunately, that also won't work. because when you add another table with the same name, automatically it will create an _1. There's no changing it. As you can see, I cannot change the name of my table. That's not an option. If I add another version of this, what is SQL Server? Do I have it already? I hope I have one of the prod ones. I don't have the prod ones. But let's say, for instance, if I do add another registry dim, assume this is prod one for the time being. If I do, it's gonna automatically create a registry dim _1. So that'll break everything, all the code that you've written. The easier thing that we have realized that we could do is knowing the list of tables that you need in that in your application, removing them. Again, this is another problem that I have seen. Maybe they added something new. Okay, yeah, there's no remove all. So you have to do it one by one, but then selecting the same thing, all of those tables that you have removed is a lot easier. So two things. One, if you have features or initially when you move from dev to prod, you'd have to remove all of your tables. What I did was just take a screenshot of all the tables I needed. And then just adding is a lot easier. All you did was just, I mean, like I showed you a minute ago, SQL Server. I already have it kind of cached. So if I select that, then I can just multi-select those tables that I want and add them all at one go. Deleting alone is a problem. So if you have a big feature or an initial deployment to prod, you can use that method. However, if you have a small minor change, like, I misspelled something, I would rather go into dev and prod version separately and then just make that change instead of trying to do this override. So that's how you can go between if the data source for the data source when you're deploying between dev and prod. Again, not a big thing. If you're doing small small changes, trying to figure out if you want to do this, parameterize and workspace and everything, this is the way. Again, I showed you how you can add sources, how you can switch between them. Remember, again, if you add one more time accidentally too, it's going to do that _1. You cannot change it. Any questions before I move on? One more thing also you can do is sometimes the app might get in a cached or a state that gets stuck in a place. Simply, you can refresh the data sources. You can also have a formula in your wherever buttons or whatever action that you're trying to accomplish in your app. Whenever the app starts, you can have a refresh. So it's just a refresh and then the name of your data source that will refresh your data source every time the app starts.
That means it's awareness of the columns in that table about the instances, right? That was me.
Yeah, it will refresh the data source itself for you. So if you added something and for some reason your application is still stuck, it doesn't see that new record, which it shouldn't, but that forces it to refresh the data source and bring it back. That is one. And also, since I mentioned now about a little bit of the app start, so this app start is key. So two properties I do want to point out too. And before even I point out the properties, again, if you're a beginner, I don't want to assume a few things. So I'm going to say there are two places you can see properties on the right here. Whenever you select any component or screen, you can see its property, regular properties and then advanced properties. Some of them you have to unlock if you want to use it and stuff like that. They have, I guess, locked it by default, so you don't accidentally go about changing a lot of things about it unless you're very deliberate about it. So that's one part. Or this top part where this formula bar is, that's a property pane too. think about it, whenever you touch any component, this is always there. This is the property base that I use more so because it's a little bit easier for me to deliberately choose which one I want. And I can go to that particular property and make changes to it. So the start screen is a very important property. It tells you which screen I want to start in. I just duplicated the same screen, but with maybe like slight modification. You can see there's a slight difference in screen itself, just to basically show you the fact that, I can start with a totally different screen. So this is like the main screen 1. And so I want my application to start with that screen. So whenever I play, or the users go to this application, it'll start there, unless they have a specific URL to the different screen. So start screen, very important. You can do only one, of course. The other one is on start. In this case, I do not have an on start, but in one of the other apps, no, this app is mainly for demo and doesn't have any sensitive data, but there is another application which has sensitive data. So I'm just going to show you the parts that are not sensitive, that are the same start screen, the on start property of it. And I'm going to explain a little bit real quick. So here, that's not the on start. This one is on start. So this on start screen, you can see I have some items. So in here, you can set variables. I have set some variables that I want to look up or use later in my stuff. So it could be just a regular single. So variables could be of multiple different kinds. It could be string, could be a record, it could be a table. So any kind of record, any kind of variable. So here I'm giving you an example of things that I want to calculate when the application starts. And throughout my application, these are going to be common, so I can use them multiple times. But I can also do this in each of the screens themselves. That way I can recalculate it anytime it goes into that screen, because it's very specific to it, just like local global variables. Now there are locals and global variables, but the way it's working, it's more of a global variable that I can use across screens. Okay, so set, again, that's the variable name, and then these are Booleans. I'm not going to go into what those do very extensively, but just setting some things, I guess, in this case, to either figure out if I want to show or hide a screen or a form or a gallery. So whenever I want to show or hide one of the properties is visible, I'll show it to you in a minute, but that's the kind of way you can use it to either show or hide when you use variables. So whenever you click certain buttons, like once you're ready to save and stuff, then I can use a list of variables like this that I can set and reset every time. And also, like lookup gives you a record. So, and in this particular case, it's actually only giving me a single value. I'm only storing that single value, different kind of variable. And here I'm setting, so I wanted a list of tabs. And again, this is not sensitive information, but it's just I needed a list of tabs for that application to be used down in a couple of screens. I set it up front, and then this is the way you have a bunch of records added to a collection. So clear collect does that, and that's the collection name. So I added a bunch of stuff, and then when I go use it, I can have all those that I can show in my gallery, or in actually a gallery to be used as a tab or something like that. So those are the data sources, the main app start and stuff like that. Let me move this back. Gosh, I can't find a place I can move this. Okay. All right. Okay. Let me go back over here. So I've spoken a lot. I've not really shown you this too much. All of these components have some ability, have something that it does. So in my main screen one, here is a gallery. Galleries are usually used for viewing something. So whenever I want to see a list of something, then I see it in my gallery. So if I hover over that, I could, change the data item that it's come from. You can see that the data source, it's coming from a specific place. Again, it's locked. So I do have a bunch of stuff going on there. If that is not the case, you will actually see a particular table, which I'm going to show you in a second. But you can see, again, remember the properties that I mentioned a little bit ago? For gallery, again, viewable data, you're just showing the user something and then you want them to select something in that. And so that way a form displays it. Two main properties are relevant. One, actually, let me start with the items, which we are in items. So it's going to show you a list of items. So in this case, I have a table, and then I'm looking for something that I already looked up. You can see that there is a search function right here. I have two drop downs, and I'm going to use the search as well to look something up, and whatever I find is going to show up in my list of items. Currently, I don't have any, but I will show it to you when I play it. But you kind of get the idea. I mean, this is a source, and then you can have filter. If you remember, it's this kind of like power. What is it? Oh gosh, why am I blanking? This is the DAX, basic DAX that you've seen for anything that you've worked in Excel. Similar structure. So you can do a filter of the entire table. And of course, there's something called searchable. So there are less than a certain number of records. This is what Power Apps can pull in. Oh yeah, this is something I was struggling for a while. So again, I want to point this out. Whenever you're displaying data, you mainly look at the number 500. So what that is by default, your Power App is set to displaying only 500 items. So if you want to use functions to restrict it to less than that amount, like filter and a few other functions, that what they do is they will keep your viewable data tighter, for lack of a better term. Some of the functions are that, for not going to the technical term, some functions do let you limit to that 500 on the fly. Some other functions do not. Filter is one of the functions that help you restrict it. So if you have a filter, and if I had brought it down to less than 500, it'll actually calculate and bring me that. If I have a couple other, like lookup, doesn't do that. It tries to look up everything, but beyond that 500, you're never gonna see that those list of records. So you'll always be missing that. Remember to always use like filters that are relevant, and even in some cases you might have like date filters. You might have to kind of play with it and see the amount of data that you're looking at. Restrict it to where you can bring it down to 500. There is a setting in the backend. It lets it go up to 2000, but that's going to have a performance hit, of course. Again, when we are trying to display data, if we are trying to display more than 500 records, I feel like that's a lot of data that somebody is never going to keep working on. So just remember that from an application standpoint. So use filter, search. I mean, in this case, I'm also using search. That way I can search for the particular items that I'm looking for. And then I want to get the output list here. What does what does all of those mean? Let me also let me play it so you can see what that means. So now I don't have any data. I had created it for something. Let me select one. Did I not create it for this? Patient. Okay. So as you can see, I did use all three of that. Thankfully, you were able to see that in like demo, I was looking for a particular stuff. I don't have to, in fact, look for inpatient. And you could see how it was trying to search for it. That's the filter in work, because the filter was filtering out, I think, the registry and the parameter type. That's what we call it. So this is a stroke registry. And again, this does not have any patient data. This is just because we were working on some registry. So I thought I would use that as an example. These are not real data. This is not real data or anything either. So inpatient, I can just search for in, and you can see there's an inpatient record showing up. So as you can see, as soon as this got highlighted, also in the back end, it's looking to show that up in the form. The same record is showing in the form, and once I see it, I can click on this edit, and then I can make changes to it, and then I can save it or cancel it. But basically, you get the idea for the list of items that we see here. I think I also added some random items to one of these other ones. Gosh, I wish I'd remember which one it was. Actually, let me see over here. What was it? Was it this one? Diagnosis. No. Bariatrics. Gosh, I have only the DIM ID here. Oh, I have in diagnosis codes right there. Yeah. So again, so I mean, even though this is like numbers, think of it as actually being a diagnosis code. I don't know, for a stroke in this case. Okay. So when you see I select a different one, it gets highlighted right away. It went to that code, and I can make a change to it. In this case, I'm not like, there could be a description of this demo that, sorry, this ID that I'm calling something like, I don't know, stroke, what is it, DIA or whatever kind of stroke. But that's the idea. That's how galleries work. Again, I want to point out now that you see, you've seen it working. So items is one thing. And also, where are your record gallery? Okay. There's something called on select. So whenever you select it, you select an item, then what happens is what you're trying to say here. In this case, it's a little bit not straightforward. It says, you know, have an item selected, true, and then the current item. So current item is a variable that stores this item. This item is a record of whatever you've selected. So what that means is it has the ID, the other list of IDs that are here on the form. You can see like the register. Sorry. And I wish I could. Let me show it. Okay. So you can see the registry, the parameter IDs, and the demo code. That's an entire record is being stored in this item. And you can see whenever it is called in this title, this item dot this demo set code. So if I want to see only that particular item, this item dot whatever it is. So whenever you want to look up or connect that in the data source of a form, in this case, that's what it's used. But any other screen, if you want to connect to it, you would call that record gallery. The one good thing about their formulas, whenever you start typing stuff, it shows up what component that you're typing about. So for instance, it's called records gallery 1_1. Again, not very intuitive name. It'd be great to have intuitive names whenever you see all of this. For the time being, just assume this is the case. So if I did, I'm not going to actually type the entire thing, but I'm going to just show you how the IntelliSense is very helpful a lot of times. Record, sorry, registry. Oh, the data. Oh man, lookup doesn't like that, does it? Lookup is a record. Sorry, data source is a table. Cannot have different types, which is why it was not liking me do that. Filter registry item ID equals record. Come on. Out of all the things you won't work right now. Let me show it in a different spot. Here, go back to title. This item, let me see, let me do a width. Okay, so parent record. You're not gonna cooperate with me today, are you? Select record. Gallery, records, gallery, come on. Okay. Anyways, demo is always a time like this, right? But I'll show it to you in a minute when I go to the forms that I can use that IntelliSense and it'll give me that information, including your data source and everything. It's very good about IntelliSense. Actually, I can show you that. Items, where are you? So let's say if I want to get that, what is it, registry? IntelliSense, you're not willing to work now. Okay. It is not playing nice with me right now. Okay, here, let me go over here. Are you gonna work here for me? Discharge report. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I don't know why this is not working, but usually it shows up down like this when you're typing and you can just select it. Did I do anything weird? Maybe I did something. It's not willing to cooperate. But okay, so that's gallery display, and then you're able to select that item to be able to see that in the form. Usually the form, you try to data collection, you change one item at a time. One item at a time at the most. It's not like a bulk upload or bulk changes. Again, you could do bulk upload in a different format in a different way. I'm not going to go into that today. Or right now, let's say I go back here. So gallery helps you connect to this in a different way. In this case, let me go to the form. Where are you, form? Here. Forms have something called data cards. So every single field that goes underneath the form is a data card. But the thing also is its data source. Again, ideally, you have the data source itself. So it's a table that it's going to update. it wouldn't make sense for a single form to update multiple tables. Now you can have a form and then you can have a batch on top of it, which I'll get to in a minute. But the data source is a single data source, so it shows the item in that place. Again, that's one of the key properties. And you can see in my gallery did not show my data source. It was not highlighted. It was not changeable. I can just change it here, but my gallery had a list of transformations doing the filter and everything, which is why it was disabled. But here it's a single table, so I'm able to see it. That's the difference. I can also add fields in form. This is one thing you have to be careful about. You can add fields here. Always it tries to snap onto columns, even if you have this snap to columns off. What does this mean? So I can select multiple column numbers. It'll create like 2 or 4 or 6 or stuff like that. So it'll change the column numbers because in the back end, it has equal spacing. Once you do this, and then if you decide to unsnap it, it will still hold on to that column width in the back end. If you want to change the size of this, I cannot change it beyond that column snaps. So really difficult. See, it either does 1 or 2. This is something I struggled with too whenever I was designing the forms. Simple thing is using Alt, and once you unsnap it, if you hold down Alt and then you move this, it will move it to wherever you want it to. So just know that using Alt after you unsnap the form, you'll be able to move the data card however you want to. If I move it back, see, I mean, I'm gonna snap it back to its level. Okay. So that's another tip that I didn't know as a beginner. I had to like struggle, and I think instead of holding Control or something, I accidentally did Alt, and that's how I came to know that that's how you do it. In the form, again, important properties, data source, and then there is another property very similar to what we had in the gallery called item. So you have a data source with a list of a table, has a list of records, but we want to select only one record out of them. So this helps us identify that one particular record. And you can see in here, it is pointed to that records gallery dot selected. What that means gives you the entire record. Records gallery 1, 1 -1 is this one. And also one of the other things is you can use these objects, these components in various formulas. And for a beginner, if you're worried about renaming them, don't worry about it. Thankfully, the IntelliSense works very well. When you make a change to that component name, the underlying formulas get changed too, which is nice. You don't have to worry about doing that initially itself. You can go rename it later and not worry that it'll break the entire application. So these two items, these two properties, data source and the item, are very helpful and very important. Now, forms themselves are 3 different types of forms. One is like a view mode, edit mode. Those are the main things we care about. And then you can also delete a record. So the mode itself is that's what it's telling you. Either have it as a view mode or a new mode, or edit mode. So whenever it's new mode, you can set some defaults to your form. Again, I'm not going to go into that today, maybe a different future meeting about that. But the defaults help you set what a new record creation does and everything like that. Edit is whenever you edit it, and then view is it makes it view only. So if I play, you can see currently I cannot make changes to any of these records. It's in a view only mode. If I click on this automatically in the back end, the formula that you just saw, switched the context and makes it editable. Now I can edit the dropdown and stuff like that, and I can make a change to this form. And whenever I make a change, if I think, man, I don't know, I can always like cancel out a bit or go ahead with it, and you'll see that it changes that particular item for me. So different kinds of modes. So let's see so whenever I click on these buttons, you see that something's happening. So for everything, the property has to do something for it. So when I clicked on it, remember the onSelect property helped us see that on the form over here. The same way when I click on a button, where's the button? That button will have the related property. So if I see that button, it switches the context. So edit mode is that variable. So if the edit mode is set to true, then it was taking that edit mode, and then whatever it was doing, it was just resetting that. Okay, and then going back to the form. So those are the properties that switch between how you can change it, change a form's mode, and how you can add new one or delete or update a record. Within the form, I mentioned there's something called data card. Data cards themselves have properties of their own. So each and every component has its own property, which is sometimes good. So you have that fine grain, but also sometimes it's annoying because you have to go through every single one of them if you want to customize your application. In this case, a couple of things that are necessary for this data card is the data field. So within my table, registry dim ID is the field that this corresponds to. So whenever I make a change, it's the dim ID that it stores it in the back end. And then update is a very important thing. So it says value, blah, blah, blah. So it's this drop down that I have here. In this data card, you can see that there's a drop down. So the drop down that's selected .registry dim ID is the value that it's going to update it with. What does that mean? So here you can see in the drop down itself, again, the table stores it as the dim ID. It's an ID number. It's an auto-generated number, but there is a name related to it. So in this case, we're trying to switch between those two and update the right one. You can see, again, for the drop down, so many properties for all these components. So for the drop down, the items I'm looking at is that particular table I'm looking for. And then the default is a lookup. So it's a record. So I'm looking for, it's not a record actually. If it stops here, then it's a record. If I am looking at the registry name as an overload too, then it is a particular item that I'm looking at. So this is a particular item I'm looking at, it's the registry name. So instead of it displaying the registry dim ID here, which it won't make sense for the end users to see, but in your table, you have it as dim ID. So from your transactional table, your master, even though I have called it here dim, think of it as between transactional table and your master table. So the dim is the master table that's storing information about registries. So I'm connecting it and making them look at the registry name. However, when I'm updating this entire record, I am using the registry dim ID that I've switched it to or that I've selected. So both the things have to work together, so that way you're able to give the user only the name that they care about. And as a backend, we are still parsing out the dim ID that we need. And that's how these are all set up. So as an example, hold on, actually before that, let me also talk about one more thing, data card. So this is just the name that you see here. As you can see, it's showing registry dim ID. I don't want to really change it here. If I change it in the data card, it said display name. If you paid attention to that formula a minute ago. So display name is a good property. So you see it's looking at that particular source and it's using just the basic column name, but end users don't really care about that. Yeah. I'm gonna call this registry. Registry. And so then it's gonna just show registry instead of registry MID. You can see that. So that's data cards, the properties related to them, properties that you can switch in between like a master auto-generated ID to its master value when you're giving that as a user information. Let me show you a couple of other things too. So these are all the things about these are all the properties that are helpful in a form and its underlying components. A couple other components are there. So one is every time you see a data card key, that is the one that stores the name of it, of that value, of that car, of that field. Sorry. And usually it comes with like a text field or something. A data card usually is like this. It comes with like a data card value and a data card key, star visible and error message. So star visible is if it's a required field and it shows up, and error message, whatever, if you don't fill that out or if you want to show things like, hey, you filled this up with a number, it should be a value and so on and so forth, then you can add it to the error message. But the main things are these two. In case you always the data card value or for things that are like text. So whenever I am in the form, I can add fields and I add a field. It's gonna give me some options. Like for instance, you can see it's a numeric, it's a big int in the backend. So it's saying edit number. But if I don't want them to do that, there are a bunch of ways I can have this formatted, but I can just say view text. What that means is it'll become something that they cannot edit. I don't want them to edit the master IDs on the back end. That's gonna ruin what they are trying to do, right? So this will always be a view text for me. And even in my case, so this will add a field and this will add that data card and all these other items, as you can see. But as I was showing you here in the play, you can see that even when I was in edit mode, it is not giving me additional values than what I already have in the master list. So my source and the way I've set them at the back, and I just showed you all those properties, are already restricting it to only these values that are already in the database. So if you want to give them an access, a separate application or a part of the application to generate these, and that will be a separate screen and stuff like that. You don't want to change the master value in the same place as its transactional values. So just remember that, and you can see that even though it's an edit form, you're only editing certain things, certain elements that you want to be editable. So this is still, you can change it, but you cannot edit it. You cannot change this from being ICD diagnosis, excuse me, ICD diagnosis codes to ICD diagnosis codes 10 or something like that.
So your actual data is not normalized at all. It's literally those strings, right?
Mine is normalized to a certain extent. This is demo. So
I'm not casting aspersions as your whole database structure. I just for these fields. So those are literally fields on your record that says stroke, for instance. It's not a referential ID to something.
It is. So in this,
so it is seen through the database.
It is, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what the data card lookup did.
Okay.
So when I go back here,
Sorry, missed you do that. Sorry.
no worries. Yeah. So, where are you? So yeah, so the drop down itself is only displaying, that's displaying the name of it. But what it's looking at is the parent default is that this item.registry dim ID. That particular record, transactional record, stores the dim ID. When you're seeing it here, it's looking it up and it's giving you that as the single item.
Okay, so parent,
And it's showing, it's displaying the registry name instead of the registry dim ID. So in this particular record, though, so think of the transactional table, that's the registry demo table that has the actual registry dim ID.
Yeah.
So something like
the syntax of parent default might be what's tripping me up on that.
yeah, so here it kind of looks like this. So the this is the autogen ID. This is like the registry dim ID, but I'm looking at
normalize your data.
yes. Yeah, thank you. Yes, ideally normalizing data is great. As a, like I said, I'm a data engineer, I'm not a an application developer, so I do look into this mainly. Maybe sometimes I spend more time doing the normalization of data than application development. Good or bad, I'll leave it up to you. But yes, it is definitely
So
normalized.
So how did you decide to type the parents.default? I guess is what that's what stripped me off, that parent.default meaning.
Oh, so okay, that's a great question. So what does parent.default mean? So any of these properties might correspond to a parent property. So see, in this case, it's called display name for the entire data card. Parent, when I go to drop down, parent.default is for this particular record. So for this particular data item. So in this case, the data field, go down, please. Okay, for this data card, the data field is the default. So it is based on the context. So this is a drop down that is under, so these have hierarchy. This, when it says the parent or default, it's looking at this data card. When this says parent or default, it's looking at this form. So it's one step up above hierarchy.
So it's not parent. It's not that's like a property of the parent. It's just parent default. It goes up one level.
Yes, one level to what it might mean. So for instance, some of them might not have parent or default. Default itself is a property, which is why it's confusing. So in this case, default, you see there, is a property. So the term default versus default as property, I think is what sometimes trips us up. I know I've had this conversation with my developers too. Whenever I'm saying go to the default property, and they're like, I don't know what the default property is. What is it? Like property that's called default.
That's the point that it's parent itself, the record or whatever.
Parent, yes, item.
And so you went up one record level, which happens to be the ID that you happen to. You're on the table of the normalized, the master, the verbiage that corresponds to the IDs. You're going up one level to your parent record to see what index number you're looking for or what have you,
Yes.
ID number,
Yeah.
and then you're displaying the text
Yeah.
somehow of that.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's the, I mean, even though I'm calling it dim ID, it's basically the master key. If you're thinking of it as a transactional table, the transactional data. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So yeah, drop down. I display the name again, so they can see the name, but I update in the data card the dim ID corresponding to it. So again, go back to the update gem ID. It's very important. One of the other things I do want to mention, let's see what these things are holding. So whenever, in some cases you might have two different forms, or you might have an entire screen that's only gallery and or form. So when you select the gallery, it goes to a form and it's not split like this, let's say. Those are the cases you can use the visible property. That's one of the other things I want to state. So for the form or the gallery, every object has a visible property. In this case, it's set to true, so it's always showing up. It's a Boolean. You can have it set to false, and then it will not show up. But I can also use my variables that I showed you a little bit ago. Remember, where is it? Where are you? Gosh, I cannot find a spot to. Okay. So you see how I'm doing, like set record, date, time, or something like that. I can use, this is not a good one. Let me see. Okay, yeah. So the true or false, I'm setting it. So in one of the button clicks, you will have it set to true, and the other one will set that same to false. And the visibility property will have the name of that variable itself. So if I wanted to use that PT work list case as the variable, I will use that in the visible property. Let me show an example real quick. For instance, if I also set this whenever you keep adding stuff, adding actions to, I shouldn't say stuff, adding actions to what you're trying to accomplish, you add, you put a semicolon. That's what separates out actions. It's almost like T-SQL, where we have separate statements. So I can also make this bigger to see it, which would be helpful. So if I'm setting, demo display variable to true. So when I click this, it should set that to true. So let me also set that to false. What are you complaining about? Wait, set is not. What am I doing? Yeah, I don't know what the heck I did. Okay, here, I'll just do it. Set is not recognized function. I think I broke this application. Let me just add a random, select the entire stuff. Main screen 1. Let me insert a couple of buttons just for the quick show and tell. 1, and then one more. Let me add a button. So when I click this button, what should it do? And when I click this button, what should it do? Button. And I click this, let's say on select, set. Did I copy that? Yes, I did. Good. I did copy it. Okay, so I'm gonna set that. Copy. And then if I do this, it's gonna set it to false. It'll just toggle between those two. And then for the visible property, I'm gonna set the name of that variable. So what it does, this is an example, but you can use this anywhere. You can set this for onSelect property anywhere. So let me play. So if I click this button, it should display that form. Now it's displaying the form. If I click this button, it's gonna hide that form, basically. So that's how you can show and hide multiple components in the same screen, as an example. See, it's using the variable to set that property. So you can do the same thing for multiple records or multiple types of variables. Any questions? I think I have one last item, which is, when I did update, something happened in the back end. It's a very important thing. I'm hoping to wrap it up with that. So items are being published to it. So if I look at this, so when I clicked on it, actually, the one that showed it, no, this one, I want to see it. Okay. So if I made a change, I'll keep it right here. So this button saved it. Let me look at the button. What is it saying? It's saying submit form. But that's so easy. It's so easy. If you have everything underneath it set to how it is, and remember the data cards, we're looking at each and every field that you wanted to be updated, and then the update property of it, you can give different values. If it is a date time value that you want to set to update right now, you can add now for that. Now is a function, so it gives you the current date time, and so on and so forth. But you saw how I did that for registry, the lookup, that it was using that value. So the update will keep that data field updated with the values you are updating here. And then when you just say submit form, it's going to submit that entire form. You don't have to write specific instructions about how you're going to submit the data, other than if it is like a master value or like a date value that needs to be updated, like you mentioned. Everything else saves as it is. Submit form, great if you have very little or no customizations. Another thing is batch. Submit form actually does batch in the back end, but batch is a separate thing, a function that, today I've said a lot of things and stuffs, but I hope that was technically very sound for you guys to understand. Batch, I'm gonna again show you an example of the batch function that I wrote for another sensitive application. So I'm not going to show you the actual application, just how the backend batch is. So instead of that submit form in that function of on select, so when it says on select, I'm going to actually submit this information. So in my case, I had like a free text form that I was checking. I didn't necessarily have to do that. There is also an onChange property, which I should have showed before. Here, let me show that real quick. So in this case, there is something called onChange property. So where are you? Sorry, this onChange. Okay. So onChange, I can set it to something. In this case, where I'm showing here, I've set it to a variable. So whenever something changed, I knew that changed. I can also, that is this no text change where that's the one I set to the onChange property. And something changed that got set to true. I can also directly call it here and say that particular field, that particular whatever this component name, what is it? Let's say data card value 3-1 dot properties on change. Whenever that changed, then do this batch. So basically, only something changed and I updated it, will it update? Otherwise, if they looked at it, decided to update it and didn't make any changes, it won't update either. But you can see in batch, it's fine grained. One of the multiple overloads is the first one is a data source. It has to know the data source. If it is a new record, there is an overload called defaults after this. Again, I'm not going to go into too much depth about it. You can look it up, or maybe in one of the future stuff I can talk about it in one of the future demo sessions. For right now, it's giving the source, and then it's creating a new record. So if there was an existing record, I would do a lookup. That is another kind of overload. So right after the source, I would do a lookup. Let's say this fact ID is the primary key. I'm looking up using fact ID equals this select fact ID. If that is there, then it'll look up in the data source for that record, and then it'll update that record. Here, it's just a new record. So you can see this curly brackets giving me a record. And I am actually for each of the values. Again, the IntelliSense works great for this. When you start typing, it'll give you the list of fields. I don't know why my IntelliSense was not working right now for a lot of things. Maybe I messed up with the app something. But it usually gives you the fields, so you don't have to like remember it and everything. And then you can get all the required fields and connect it to a property, or in this case, things like this, I already have it up here. So the record, so you can see I'm using the record date time as null. I set it to that variable, the user who's doing the change, and the dim ID lookup. All of that I'm already doing it. And then actually I could just use this. Yeah, so record date time comes from here. Current user who made that change, the text that needs to go in that note. So that particular item, the text field dot text, and then any dim ID to that conversion. So in the other case, where I'm just submitting the form, I am sorry, one sec. Are you hearing me, Julie? Are you hearing me up there? Okay. Okay. Sorry. So the previous one in the submit form, we made changes to the update property in that particular for that particular data card value item. In here, you have to you mention them. So again, this is fine grained. You can decide what goes in there. And you can set those to update on the go using the patch function. It's very powerful. Patch function is a lot more powerful than submit form. Submit form is definitely easier if you don't have much customizations. And
Do you have any ability in all this to call, table functions or stored procedures or anything like that? Or I know it's not very Power Apps-y of an approach, but
right. Yeah, so Power Apps, I think there is an experimental feature that just got out last month or something for stored procedure calls. I might be wrong about that.
two different
Yeah. But that is a part of Power Automate. You can use Power Automate to do that. I know. Sad they want you to integrate all these things and for you to use everything with each other. So Power Automate can do it. Unfortunately, I don't think Power App can do other than that. Any other questions? I think those are all the properties.
It's updating the table that was defined behind the scenes for that particular record.
It doesn't have to. Batch can do pick up from any form. So the form batch function doesn't care what your form's data source is. You can have a data source in your form.
Whatever you're specifying.
Here, yes, exactly.
Or what you're updating.
Yes.
And then from where.
Yeah. So batch means you don't even need a form. I can just have a bunch of labels. So when I go back here in my Power App, you see how I created a button just randomly. I can do the same. I can just have a bunch of like text input forms. Whoops. Sorry. So a bunch of text input forms, and that itself would automatically get connected. You can use that to just connect to your batch function. Any other questions? Don't die on me. Any questions on the call? And I've not seen the call people. Okay. I know we are at time. I do want to respect people's, actually overtime. Do want to respect people's time, so I'll give it another minute. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up, and people can definitely feel free to ask us those questions outside of this call too. Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. I really appreciate you guys being here on the call and here in person. We'll talk to you guys in another meeting. Thank you.
I did have one question.
Just like that all of them, right?
Now, tell me what